All right, yesterday, the Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., held a major press conference about autism, which has now increased in children at extremely alarming rates over the past few decades. Here's a bit of what Secretary Kennedy had to say yesterday. Take a look.
The ASD prevalence rate in 8-year-olds is now 1 in 31. Shocking. There's an extreme risk for boys. Overall, the risk for boys of getting an autism diagnosis in this country is now 1 in 20. There are studies that, that look at maternal activation, so that, something happens in the womb. There are studies that look at other genetic cause. The issue that we know is genes don't cause epidemics. You need an environmental toxin. And we're going to look at all the potential culprits. We're going to look at mold. We're going to look at food additives. We're going to look at pesticides. We're going to look at air and water and medicines.
All right, here with more is the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Great to see you. How you doing?
Good to see you.
Got a lot of feedback when we went to Steak and Shake. Pretty cool.
You tried to set me up with that milkshake.
I did not try to set you up with it. They brought it over. It wasn't my fault. All right, I watched this yesterday, and here are the numbers. 1 in 31 kids have autism, okay? If you go back to just 2016, 8 years ago, it was 1 in 54. If you go to 2000, it was 1 in 150. What was the number when you were a kid, and what do you think is going on?
Well, there's really good data on that. There were many studies in the peer-reviewed literature. Probably the most important study was the biggest epidemiological study in history at that time in Wisconsin. It looked at 900,000 kids. It was published in a high gravitas journal, peer-reviewed study, and they found the rate to be 0.7 out of 10,000, so less than 1 in 10,000. There's another study, similarly important study in 1985 in North Dakota, where they looked at virtually every kid in the state, and they found there was 60 kids with autism in the state. It was about 3 per 10,000. So it went from 1 per 10,000, less than 1 per 10,000 to 3 per 10,000. Today, 2 years ago, it was 1 in 36. The CDC data that we released this week shows 1 in 31, but it's a state-by-state data. And the worst state is California, which actually has the best collection methodology. So they actually probably reflect what we're seeing nationwide. In California, it's 1 in every 20 kids and 1 in every 12.5 boys. And if you look at the minority numbers, which we don't do very well, it's much worse. And the low-functioning autism, in other words, people who have full-blown autism, which is about...
And there are degrees.
Oh, yeah, there are degrees. About 25% of the population of that, kids with autism, about 25% of them are nonverbal, non-toilet trained. They have all these stereotypical behaviors, head-banging, biting, toe-walking, stimming. And that population is growing higher and higher, so it's becoming a larger percentage. So we're seeing much more, many more cases that are now linked to severe intellectual disabilities.
So you actually got emotional yesterday while talking about children suffering from the disorder. You lashed out at the media, which they're a bunch of ignoramuses and jackasses, and I'm not fond of them, so I'm glad you did. And you said they were in epidemic denial. You said autism destroys families, and more importantly, our greatest resource are children. And then these are kids, you said they'll never hold a job, they'll never pay taxes, meaning for a society. People mistook that. Then you added, they'll never play baseball, write a poem, go out on a date. They'll never be able to live unassisted lives. You're talking about the totality of their life. And people seem to just want to put their head in the sand and not look at the scientific numbers.
Yeah,
what do you think is causing this?
Let me say this. There are many kids with autism who are doing well. They're holding down jobs. They're getting paychecks. They're living independently. But I was specifically referring to that 25%, the group that is nonverbal.
That was clear. You were not ambiguous
Right.
on that. You were clear.
Right. And you know what the larger point is that the media has bought into this industry canard, this mythology, that we're just seeing more autism because we're noticing it more, we're better at recognizing it, or there's been changing diagnostic criteria. There is study after study in the scientific literature going back decades that says that that's not true. In fact, California legislature in 2013 asked the Mind Institute at UC Davis to look exactly at that topic. They said, is it real or are we just noticing it more? And the Mind Institute came back and said, absolutely, this is a real epidemic. This is something we've never seen before. But anybody with common sense, Sean, would notice that because the autism, this epidemic is only happening in our children. It's not happening in people our age. And if it was better recognition, you'd see it in 70-year-old men. And I'll say this, I want to be very careful when I say it because I've never seen a person with full-blown autism. I've seen many people with Asperger's and, you know, on the spectrum who are my age. I've never seen anybody with full-blown autism. That means nonverbal, non-toilet trained, etc. You don't see these people walking around a mall because they don't exist in our age, or they're very, very rare. They do exist, but they're rare, so rare that I've never seen one. And I've been around intellectual disabilities my entire life. But in our children's age group, they're everywhere. It's 1 in 20 boys. And in California, 1 in 12.5 boys has autism, and 25% of those look like that.
Where is the science pointing? Where, I mean, we are getting data. They are investigating it. Where do you think we're going to end up? What is your best guess, hypothesis, theory at this point?
Well, President Trump asked me to find out what's causing it. And I'm approaching that agnostically. We are looking at everything we're going to do. We're going to be very transparent in how we design the studies. We're going to farm the studies out to 15 premier research groups from all over the country. And we're going to be transparent about our protocols, about the data sets, and then every study will have to be replicated. We're going to look at mold. We're going to look at the age of parents. We're going to look at food and food additives. We're going to look at pesticides and toxic exposures. We're going to look at medicines. We're going to look at vaccines. We're going to look at everything.
Well, that's the quintessential definition of science, and you're going to get to the bottom of it. I only have about 20 seconds. How long do you think it'll take?
I think we'll have some preliminary answers in 6 months, but it'll take us probably a year from then before we can have definitive answers, because a lot of these studies will not go out until the end of the summer.
All right.
But I'm very grateful to President Trump for putting me in this position. We are going to have an answer, and we're going to have it very quickly.
We appreciate you coming in. Good to see you.
Thank you, Sean.